Hello and welcome to the Ottawa Herald's 2012 General Election Candidate Interviews. I'm Bobby Burch and I'm here with Denise Cassells. Thanks for joining us, Ms. Cassells.
Thank you.
Ms. Cassells is a candidate seeking election in Senate District 12, which includes all of Franklin County. So let's get started. Ms. Cassells, I'd like our viewers to learn a little bit more about you. Could you tell us where you're from and maybe how you're involved in the local community?
Well, I am from Kansas. I did live in Colorado for about 11 years, and I lived in Arizona for about 10 years. So I've been around a little bit, but Kansas is my roots. Always lived on a farm my whole life, mostly around cattle and horses. In fact, we currently live on a couple of hundred acres in Lynn County, just outside of Mound City, where we raise Black Angus. I am involved in the Mound City planning and zoning and have been for a number of years. I also do fundraising for the local all-volunteer fire department, concerned about some of the funding that they've lost over the years. And in Miami County, I'm on the Adult Continuing Education Advisory Board. So I've had some involvement and through journalism, covering a lot of commissioner meetings, city council meetings, and school board meetings. You do get a first-hand knowledge of what board members have to deal with budgets.
Okay. I know you just mentioned a little bit of that experience. What kind of political experience or committee experience might help you in this venture?
Well, I think primarily my experience has always been in small business management, over 22 years in fact. I mean, I currently am in management. My husband is a sole proprietor. He builds homes for a living. With that kind of management experience, you know firsthand what it means to balance a budget. In the state, we have to balance our budget by law. And working with payroll, I think that those things, first and foremost, will help me understand the state budget and how that affects all of the residents who will be affected by our budget in the state, and what it means to balance that budget, and the process involved in maintaining funding for the programs that we rely on every day.
Okay. What are some of the legislative priorities in your political platform?
Well, first and foremost, there's three things really that tie together. One is our school funding. I'm very concerned about all of the largest cut, in fact, in our state's history has come in the last 2 years under Governor Brownback, and I think that we have an obligation, a constitutional obligation, in fact, to fund public schools. So I see that as a primary obligation for the state. And the way that we do that is not, in my opinion, by eliminating 40% of our income, which we do with the House bill that came out 2117. That bill eliminates roughly 40% of our revenue at the state level. And so when they say they're cutting taxes, what they're actually doing is they're shifting the tax burden to local communities. And Kansas already pays across the board an average of 38.9% of their income in property taxes, whereas Missouri, for example, pays 15%. And I know that it's hurting us since they eliminated a bill that they started in 1938 in Kansas, the local ad valorem tax relief fund. They eliminated that, and since then, in 13 years, our property taxes in the state have doubled, literally doubled. So we are taking money out of citizens' pockets, I think, in that they're paying so much for property taxes and not able to put that money back into their communities. So for me, infrastructure, creating jobs, lowering the property tax burden, and funding our schools are my primary principles for running for office.
Okay. Well, how do you plan to accomplish some of those priorities? I know you mentioned adequate school funding as being a key part of your platform. How would you try to go about accomplishing that?
Well, the first thing that we would look at, there was a Senate bill introduced, Senate Bill 409, that is still sitting in the Senate committee, in fact, that has not really been looked at. And that starts back with the local ad valorem tax relief fund. I think that the first thing we have to do is try our level best to repeal 2117. The bill passed, in a manner that I don't know that many people follow the news every single day, but Governor Brownback essentially assured many senators that that bill would not be as it came out of the House. It did pass the House with 33 Democratic House members and the rest being Republican House members. There was no issue with getting it through the House. But the senators would not. They refused to pass the bill because they understood, I think, what we're looking at as far as reducing, or putting a heavier burden on local communities. And so we lost a lot of really good Republican senators in the state of Kansas during the primaries, unfortunately, who understood the dynamics that this tax bill is going to have on our state. So I think that for us to try to repeal that is our first objective. If we can't repeal it, we need to lessen that. And I think that obviously we'll need to revisit it. And I think that Governor Brownback wasn't exactly thrilled with the House bill that originally passed. In fact, he indicated that he wasn't. But he did give the assurance to the senators that we would revisit it when, in fact, we didn't get a chance to revisit it, and he signed the bill.
If elected to the Kansas Senate, are there any committees or action groups that you hope to be a part of?
Well, I think that, we have to look at education. For me, my daughter teaches Head Start, and she loves it. And I know that there are so many children across the state who are somewhat at a disadvantage, unfortunately, in a lot of these lower income rural communities throughout the state. I think that you see so many children who are not getting everything they could be getting in the way of that early outreach to get them educated. And when they're young, you can do so much to shape and mentor those children. So I look at our obviously educating our kids is extremely important to me. Living on a farm, raising Black Angus, agriculture is extremely important to me as well. And I see how much of a struggle it is for a lot of farmers, especially this last year with the drought that we've had. And I don't know that, that's necessarily going to improve. We certainly hope it will. But there have to be new ways to address those issues if they don't improve. So those two areas certainly are a focus for me, and anything that we can do to involve community organizations to work, local chambers, for example, do a lot for their communities. And so working through those local organizations and building outward, starting from the bottom down, I think is really important.
Okay. Much of the 2012 legislative session was defined by political gridlock and the legislature's inability to reach a compromise. If elected, how would you work to reach a compromise with Topeka?
Well, my background, I spent 16 years as a registered Republican and grew up, my whole family was Republican, in fact. I think I'm one of two Democrats, with the exception of my immediate family. And for 16 years, I had an opportunity to see a whole different perspective, I guess. And then I changed my voter affiliation in 2000 and became an independent voter. And in 2004 is when I changed over to the Democratic Party. You're put in a position, unfortunately, where you have to decide where you kind of fall in line. And for me, I've always considered myself right down the middle on the issues. So I think that is going to be conducive to working and listening to what everyone has to say. Certainly, if you're an elected official, your voice is important because you represent a lot of people. And so with keeping that in mind, if you're listening truly to your constituents, then you're bringing to the table what your constituents would hope you to bring to the table. So you have to come to it with an open mind. You cannot be an ideologue. Basically, you can't do that in politics. You have to have an open mind and be willing to listen to all sides and reach a compromise. I think that, the gridlock that we witnessed last legislative session, taxpayer paid dearly for that. It cost us 9 days in over session. We couldn't get a district map, presented. We couldn't get it down and put politics aside, and we couldn't pass a budget. And so I think that those are important issues for people to look at. Now, we're going to have a lot of lawsuits over this tax bill because it's written wrong in many places, in fact. So I think there's 7 or 8 provisions in it that are going to have to be addressed, and some in court, unfortunately. But to have taxpayers pay 9 days over, I think is a crime. I really do. People need to get their jobs done in a timely manner. That's what's expected of them.
Okay. Well, the legislature's research group has predicted that the Kansas new budget will result in a several $billion shortfall by 2018. While its supporters, on the other hand, claim that it will help the state economically and also create lots of jobs. What do you think of this new tax plan?
I don't like it at all. I agree. It seems to me that if you read the newspapers, if you stay on top of the issues, every economist, with the exception possibly of Art Laffer, who Governor Brownback paid $75,000 to basically write the bill that he wanted to see. We've had national economists look at this, and this is by far the most regressive tax bill we've ever passed in the state. It's detrimental to our state. The deficit that it will create, when you eliminate, as we've discussed before, 40% of your income, if you will, your state revenue, you have to start cutting programs. You have no choice. And by shifting that cut, the state can say, like I've said, we're cutting your taxes. But if we look at the numbers, if you're making $35,400 annually, or you're 55 years and older, you're also losing your food sales tax rebate, which is essentially $50 a person in your family. That's a big deal. We're one of 3 states in the entire country, along with Mississippi and Alabama, who don't offer some sort of relief through that food sales tax rebate to our citizens now. And I think that's unfortunate. There are also provisions that eliminate child daycare expenses. They eliminate other programs through tax deductions now too. So when you look at how much you're actually saving by paying the income tax versus what you're going to be paying, losing the deductions that you would normally file on your taxes, you're coming out about even in many places. However, if you're in the bottom 20% income earners in the state, you're actually losing $148 annually on average. Your income tax will increase 1.3%, whereas if you make $400,000 to $1,054,000 annually, you're actually gaining roughly over $21,000 a year. So there's a big disparity there. But the biggest thing that we have to look at with this bill is if we're cutting 40% out of our budget, okay, what we're paying out to the state to provide services, how are we going to make up the difference? Where are we going to take it from? There's only 2 places you can take it from. You can either raise property taxes even higher, which is going to further devastate our local communities, and you can increase sales tax. And it was just announced yesterday that Governor Brownback is looking at keeping the sunset, not letting this 1-cent sales tax increase that was passed that's supposed to sunset. They're probably going to try to get that passed so that it will become permanent. So that is it is a tax increase. So it is going to hurt us because, like I said, you can't get rid of 40% of your income without cutting other programs, and that's our safety net, and that's our schools.
Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned this among your legislative priorities if elected. Could you talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on Kansas infrastructure and specifically roads? Do you have any ideas of what you'd like to see there?
I'd like to see a lot of things there. I think we all would. I think that the T-Works program, first of all, is very important to the state. We unfortunately just took $7 million out of T-Works to renovate the landscaping at the Capitol, which I saw as just a really, almost a crime, really. I think that if Governor Brownback's plan were to work, which if you look at the overall picture, we have 1.6 million people who are eligible to work in the state of Kansas out of about 3 million people. So if you look at that 1.6 million people who are eligible to work, what we would need to do by 2018 is to create roughly 500 to 550,000 jobs by 2018, and each of those jobs would have to pay roughly $50,000 annually apiece. Now, that just doesn't seem realistic to me. I don't know of too many jobs that you can walk into and make $50,000 annually up front. When our college students can't find jobs as it is, this is going to be a very difficult process. We also tried to introduce a bill that would require 70% of the workers that businesses hire in the state come from in-state employees, and they voted that down. So we're trying to keep those jobs local. But if these big businesses are supposed to come to our communities without the infrastructure in place to do that, they're not going to come. So it is extremely important that we make our highway system, our transportation system, as business friendly as possible. So it's very important. It's key, in fact, to bringing businesses to our communities.
What are some of the main differences that you see between you and your opponent?
Well, the biggest difference, obviously, is the income tax bill that passed. I know that my opponent was endorsed personally by Governor Brownback, and that's fine. But I think that a lot of people are starting to see where these policies are going in the state of Kansas, and I think that when you dramatically change the tax structure in the state, risking a lot, risking our future essentially, and looking down the road, betting on a lot of different things that may probably not happen, we're looking at a potential crisis in the state. Our local communities, I know that my opponent cares deeply about the citizens, and I don't question anyone who runs for public office that they do. But we have a fundamental difference in this income tax bill, and I think, honestly, with the endorsement from KNEA, Citizens for Higher Education, and Kansas Families for Education, we have an essential different take on how important our education system is in our state as well.
Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our interview with Denise Cassells. Thanks for stopping in.
Thank you very much, Bobby.
Thanks.